Sheriff Arnold Riley, a rugged man in his late 40s with graying hair and a sun-beaten face, trudged cautiously through ankle-deep floodwaters near Woodbury Hill. His boots felt heavy, sinking slightly into the silt and debris beneath. The Category 5 storm had left Woodbury unrecognizable, the town covered in floodwaters, many buildings, skeletal remnants of what they once were. The death of so many would later bring about an increase in wild animal attacks in the town. The sheriff's heart sank as he scanned the desolate countryside, but he pressed on, his flashlight cutting weakly through the early morning mist. He paused to listen, his ears straining for anything beyond the eerie silence, and then he heard a sound. Before we dive into the story, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already done so. A faint, desperate cry. His head snapped toward the sound. In the distance, tangled in a thicket of branches half submerged in high floodwaters, was a figure. Squinting, he made out the small, shaking form of a girl clinging to a tree limb. The girl's swarthy skin glistened with water, and her eyes darted around in desperation. "Hold on!" Arnold bellowed, his voice assuring but laced with urgency. Amara Wilkerson spotted him and whimpered, her grip tightening on the tree limb as the current tugged at her legs. Arnold wasted no time. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was everywhere. Uprooted trees, submerged cars, and shattered homes. When he reached her, the tree loomed near them, its lower branches dipping precariously under the weight of debris and the current. The teenage girl was trembling, her arms strained and swollen from clutching the rough bark for so long. "You're doing good, sweetheart," Arnold said, his voice steady and calm despite the rush of adrenaline. "I'm here now. We're gonna get you out of this, all right?" She nodded shakily, her expression contorted and terrified. "Okay, listen to me," he continued, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "I need you to let go of the tree, but only when I say. I'll hold on to you, and we'll get through this together. Can you trust me?" She hesitated, her fingers digging into the bark one last time. Finally, she nodded again. "That's a brave girl. On 3, 1, 2, 3. She released the tree, and Arnold immediately wrapped an arm around her waist, anchoring both of them against the current. The water surged around them, cold and unrelenting, but the sheriff held onto Amara firmly, slowly moving step by step through the swirling flood until they reached a patch of higher ground, a sturdy island of safety in the chaos. She stared at him with great fear and terror, breathing heavily, her petite frame shaking with relief and fear. They were safe now, and he moved apart from her but placed a hand on her shoulder to reassure her. "You're safe now," he said, his voice gentle in the midst of turmoil. "What's your name, honey?" "Amara," she whispered hoarsely. "All right, Amara, you're one tough kid, you know that?" He offered her a faint smile, one that was equal parts admiration and encouragement. "Let's get you somewhere dry. I have a log cabin a little ways to the right. You'll be okay there." As he supported her with a hand around her waist, the two unsteadily trudged through mounds of mud, various debris and puddles of water, the resilience of the human spirit glinting faintly amid the devastation. Amara glanced back once at the tree that had been her lifeline, now distant and half hidden by the water, before turning forward and moving with the sheriff. For the first time in hours, she felt the faint stirrings of safety. The trek to Arnold's cabin was grueling. Heavy rains and flooding had turned the familiar path into a treacherous swamp, with overflowing water sucking their feet with every step. Arnold held Amara closer, one arm wrapped firmly around her as he guided her forward. Her small body shivered against his side, drenched from head to toe. "Not much farther now," he said, his voice rough but kind, trying to reassure her despite the cold and exhaustion gnawing at them both. After what felt like an eternity, the cabin came into view, a modest log structure nestled among the trees on slightly higher ground. Arnold tightened his grip on Amara, helping her across the last stretch of uneven ground until they reached the sturdy front porch. He pushed the door open and ushered her inside. The cabin was dimly lit, the faint smell of wood and earth lingering in the air. It was a humble space, with a single-room layout centered around a stone fireplace. Arnold led Amara to a wooden chair near the hearth, lowering her gently onto it. "Stay here," he said softly. "Let me get you some dry clothes." He moved quickly to a nearby chest, rummaging through until he pulled out a thick woolen blanket and a t-shirt. He rolled up the clothes in the blanket and gave them to Amara. "There's the bathroom. Go in there, shower, take off your wet clothes, put on one of these t-shirts, and wrap yourself in the blanket," he said in a soft but firm tone of voice. "Sorry, I don't have any clothes for a little girl. I have plenty more shirts in that chest. Feel free to use them whenever you want. Your clothes will dry faster in front of the fireplace. I'm going to start the fire right away." Amara hesitated, her wide eyes darting to him nervously. "I'll give you some space," Arnold assured her. "You'll warm up faster this way. Just trust me, okay?" She nodded, her trust in him outweighing her embarrassment. Turning away, Arnold busied himself at the fireplace. He pulled a matchbox from the coffee table drawer and knelt before the hearth, carefully arranging logs and kindling. With a few quick strikes, the flame caught, and a soft glow filled the room as the fire crackled to life. The warmth began to seep into the space, pushing back the damp chill that had followed them. Amara wrapped the blanket over the t-shirt she had put on, her wet clothes now draped over the back of a chair to dry. She scooted closer to the fire, her teeth still chattering as she soaked in its heat. Arnold stood, brushing his hands against his pants before heading to a small wardrobe near the corner of the room. "Give me a second to get out of these wet clothes, too," he said over his shoulder. He pulled out a flannel shirt and a pair of dry jeans, disappearing momentarily into the bathroom. When he returned, he looked slightly less rugged, his dry clothes fitting snugly against his broad frame. He rubbed his hands together and moved back to the fire, pulling up a chair beside Amara. "Are you okay?" he asked, glancing over at her. Amara nodded slowly, her body finally beginning to relax under the blanket's warmth. "Good," he said. "This storm did a number on Woodbury, but we're safe now." Arnold stood, his hands on his hips, as he surveyed the scene outside through the window. He knew the town hall building was set up as a gathering place for missing family members, but the thought of taking the girl over there gnawed at him. The chaos, the overcrowding, the possibility that her family might not even be there. It all seemed overwhelming, especially for a child who had just survived a nightmare. He turned back to her, his decision made. "How about this, kid? You stay here for now. I can go and get you some more clothes at the town hall building later. Here, you'll be safe. Is that okay with you?" Amara's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, thank you," she replied. For the first time since the hurricane struck, Amara felt encouraged about the future. The fire continued to crackle, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the cabin, and for now she felt as if the chaos outside had gone away. The fire crackled steadily, filling the cabin with a soft, warm glow. Arnold leaned back in his chair, his gaze lingering on Amara as she huddled in the blanket. Her wet braids clung to her body, and her eyes, though tired, seemed to hold a quiet resilience. He didn't speak for a while, letting the stillness of the moment settle around them. After some time had passed, he cleared his throat. "How old are you, Amara?" She glanced at him, her voice barely above a whisper. 12. Arnold nodded, his expression softening. 12, he murmured, almost to himself. He didn't press her further, sensing the emotional weight of everything she'd endured. She didn't need questions right now. She needed time to recuperate. As he sat there, a memory surfaced. His daughter, Pat. He remembered how much she loved drinking hot cocoa when she was the same age, more than 10 years ago, especially on cold nights like this. A small, bittersweet smile played across his lips at the thought. Those were the happiest times in his life, when his wife, Gloria, was still alive and they lived in a house close to town. But now, Gloria had died of cancer, and his daughter was now grown up, living as estranged from him as he had been from her and her mother, working long shifts as the sheriff of Woodbury. In his depressed state, overwhelmed not only by the loss of his wife but also by the psychological strain of Pat not being with him during his time of need. He decided to move into a cabin in the country, hoping that nature would bring him healing. Rising from his chair, he moved to the small kitchen area, his boots echoing softly on the wooden floor. "You like hot cocoa?" he asked over his shoulder. Amara looked up, a hint of surprise flickering across her face before she nodded. "All right then. 1 cup of cocoa coming right up." Arnold set to work, heating some milk on the small stovetop and stirring in cocoa powder and sugar. The simple act felt grounding, a small slice of normalcy amidst the chaos. When the cocoa was ready, he poured it into 2 mugs and brought them back to the fire. "Here," he said, handing one to Amara. "Careful, it's hot." She took the mug, wrapping her hands around it as if trying to soak up its warmth. They sat in silence for a while, sipping the cocoa and staring into the fire. The quiet was comfortable, almost soothing, as the storm outside continued its distant, muffled rage. After some time, Arnold stood up and set his empty mug in the sink. "You should get some rest," he said gently. "I'll set up the sleeper sofa for you." Amara nodded, watching as he pulled the sofa bed out and threw fresh sheets, blankets, and a pillow on it. "It's not much," Arnold admitted, smoothing the blanket down. "But it's comfortable enough. You make yourself at home, all right? Looks like we may be here for a while." She hesitated before nodding again, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Arnold double-checked the front and back door locks. "I'll be in the bedroom," he said, gesturing toward the door at the far end of the cabin. "If you need anything, just knock. Don't hesitate, okay?" "Okay," she said softly. Arnold offered her a small, reassuring smile before retreating to his room. He silently closed the door before disrobing for bed. The morning sun filtered weakly through the wooden blinds of the cabin, casting soft streaks of light across the walls. Arnold stretched as he rose from his bed, the aches from the previous day still lingering. The fire had burned down to embers, but the room retained its warmth. He glanced toward the sleeper sofa. Amara was still curled up under the blankets, her breathing slow and even. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. At least she'd found some rest. Moving quietly, he headed to the small kitchen area. Pulling out a frying pan, he lit the stove and got to work. Soon, the rich aroma of sizzling bacon filled the cabin, mingling with the sound of eggs cracking and the comforting pop of bread in the toaster. Arnold set 2 plates at the table, adding glasses of milk to complete the simple meal. As he flipped the last piece of bacon, he heard a rustling behind him. Turning, he saw Amara sitting up on the sofa, her blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Her eyes, still puffy from exhaustion, widened slightly as she took in the smell of breakfast. "Morning," Arnold greeted her, his voice warm but low. "Hope you're hungry." Amara nodded, managing a faint smile. "You're welcome to continue wearing my t-shirts or change into your clothes if you want." Amara hesitated momentarily, then gathered and rolled her clothes into a neat pile next to the chest, deciding instead on the convenience of using Arnold's t-shirts as her daily wear. After she had gone into the bathroom, Arnold could hear the faint sound of running water. He turned back to the table to make sure everything was ready. When she emerged, dressed in a t-shirt, her braids hung damp but clean. Arnold motioned to the table. "Come on, sit down. Got us some breakfast." She took her seat, glancing at the plate in front of her: eggs, bacon, toast, and a glass of milk. The corners of her mouth twitched as if she wanted to smile but wasn't quite sure how. They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds were the clink of silverware on plates and the occasional creak of the wooden table. Arnold watched her carefully, noting the way she nibbled at her toast, her mind clearly elsewhere. After a moment, he set down his fork. "Amara," he said gently, "how did you end up out there all alone in the storm?" She froze, her fork hovering over her plate. Slowly, she raised her gaze to meet him, her dark eyes shimmering with tears. Arnold's heart sank. He reached across the table, resting a rough, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "you don't have to answer that. I'm sorry if I upset you." The tears slipped down her cheek, and she wiped them away quickly, looking down at her plate. "It's all right," Arnold continued, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You've been through a lot. We can talk about it whenever you're ready. No rush." Amara gave a small nod, her eyes blinking. "Try not to worry, okay?" he said, his voice steady and kind. "You're safe here, and we'll figure everything out together." "I'm going to keep searching with the townspeople," he told her. "You stay here, all right? Stay safe. I'll be back before sundown." Amara nodded, her gaze following him to the door. "Be careful." "Always," Arnold said, offering her a reassuring smile before stepping out into the battered world beyond the cabin. While he was gone, Amara busied herself around the cabin. She tidied up, rebraided her braids, and experimented in fixing dinner with the food Arnold had stockpiled as a prepper. Arnold soon found out that Amara had a knack for turning even the simplest ingredients into tasty dinners. Arnold felt petrified in looking at what once was the law enforcement building, his boots sinking slightly into the muddy ground. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and splintered wood. Pieces of the roof lay scattered across the street like discarded playing cards, while the station's sign, once proudly bearing the name of the town, dangled precariously from a twisted pole. Now he was the only one left. His hands trembled as he adjusted the brim of his hat, which was bent from the storm's fury. The familiar hum of the dispatch radio, the comforting buzz of chatter between officers, none of it remained. The hurricane had taken everything. Arnold stepped outside, the gray sky pressing down on him like a shroud. He scanned the horizon, the wreckage of homes and cars a testament to the storm's relentless power. Somewhere beneath the rubble, he knew his team lay silent. His team. His family. One of the townswomen called out, her voice raw and cracking, while searching for her missing child. "Joshua." "Joshua?" Arnold embraced her, trying to give her comfort. As reality hit her, she broke down in tears. The hurricane had departed, leaving behind a barren town filled with the weight of destruction, aftermath of the storm. The pain and devastation ached deeply within Arnold's soul. The afternoon sun peeked through the gaps in the windows of Arnold's living room, casting slivers of light onto the worn-out carpet. The air was still, save for the occasional creak of the house settling, a sound that had grown familiar since the storm's wrath had left the small town isolated. As time passed, Arnold began to notice a shift in the town's rescue team. Word spread of the town people's daily search efforts, and volunteers from outside the town began streaming in to join them. A gathering of individuals, their faces lined with grief and determination, now met each morning near the outskirts of the town. Together they combed through the wreckage, their collective resolve a glimmer of hope in the aftermath of the storm. Arnold felt exhausted by the devastation of death that he and the townspeople had found, and all the commotion and pain that went along with it. He would be relieved each day when he came to the cabin to find peace and comfort. The evenings, however, were still for Arnold and Amara. One evening, Arnold sat down to a steaming bowl of stew Amara had prepared. He took a bite and let out an appreciative sigh. "This is incredible," he said, leaning back in his chair. Amara's face lit up with quiet pride. "Thank you." "Thanks, kid," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're doing a lot," she said softly, sitting down across from him. "You help so much." Arnold looked at her, his tired eyes meeting her earnest gaze. He considered how, for the first time in years, he did not feel so weighed down by the loss of his wife and estrangement of his daughter. "So do you," he said. "This cabin feels like a real home because of you. That's no small thing. You know that?" Amara gazed at Arnold. "Thank you," she slowly replied. "Where did you learn to cook so well?" he asked. "My mom taught me how to cook," Amara said. "She did a great job, kid," he said with a slight smile. The storm had taken so much, but in the quiet of the cabin, amid the smell of delicious cooked meals and the glow of the fire, they'd found something to hold on to, each other. The midday sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing. Amara stood by the clothesline stretched between two trees outside the cabin, pinning up freshly washed clothes. A gentle breeze rustled the surrounding foliage, and for a moment, everything seemed calm. As she reached for another shirt, a low growl broke the tranquility. She froze, her hand still gripping the damp fabric. Slowly, she turned her head, and her heart plummeted. "Ah!" Amara screamed in surprise. A coyote stood near the log cabin, its amber eyes fixed on her, its teeth bared in a snarl. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, panic surged through her. Dropping the shirt, Amara bolted toward the woods, her bare feet pounding against the ground. The coyote let out a sharp yip and lunged after her, its paws kicking up dirt as it closed the distance. Her chest tightened, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. She could hear the predator's footsteps getting closer behind her, the sound of its claws scraping against the earth. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the air. Amara stumbled to a halt, her heart hammering in her chest as she turned toward the sound. In the clearing of the trees, Arnold stood with his pistol pointing upwards. The coyote skidded to a stop, its ears flattening as it darted away into a thicket of trees, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Amara's legs felt like jelly, but she willed herself to move, running toward Arnold. "Arnold!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. As she reached him, she flung herself into his arms, clutching his shoulders with trembling hands. Arnold wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "It's all right," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "It's gone now. You're safe." Amara shook against him, her fear spilling out in quiet sobs. Arnold held her firmly, his hand resting protectively across her back. "Let's go inside," he said gently. She nodded, her face buried against his chest as he guided her back toward the cabin. The clothes flapped forgotten on the line, and the clearing was silent again, save for the sound of their footsteps. Inside, Arnold settled her onto the sofa, still keeping an arm around her. "You're all right now," he said, his voice firm but kind. "It's okay. Nothing's going to get to you in here." As Arnold pushed open the cabin door, the comforting aroma of dinner greeted him. Inside, Amara stood by the stove, stirring a pot with practiced ease. She glanced over her shoulder as he entered, her face lighting up with a small, welcoming smile. "Yo," she said softly. "Dinner's almost ready." Arnold smiled, setting his shotgun and coat aside. "Smells great. You've outdone yourself again." A few minutes later, they sat at the small wooden table, 2 plates of steaming spaghetti in front of them. Amara had cooked ground meat with some of the meat from Arnold's freezer, tossed with freshly cooked spaghetti and sauce. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of their forks against their plates and the crackle of the fire. But tonight, Amara seemed more restless than usual, her fork poking at her food. "I miss my dad," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Arnold paused mid-bite, setting his fork down as he looked at her. "Do you want to talk about it?" Amara hesitated, then nodded. For the first time since she'd arrived at the cabin, she began to open up. "My mom and dad are divorced. During the summer I go to live with my dad," her voice trembling slightly. "I was staying at Best Inn with Dad when the storm came. He went to meet someone he had met online, some lady that lives in Woodbury. He came to Woodbury to meet her in person. He said they'd been chatting online for a year, and since it was summertime, I came with my dad." Arnold nodded quietly, letting her continue at her own pace. "He had just gone to meet her before the storm came," Amara said, her eyes welling up with tears. "When it started raining, I got worried. He wasn't answering his phone and I didn't know where he was. I thought maybe he was stuck somewhere, so I went outside to look for him. But the rain—" She paused, her voice breaking. Arnold reached across the table and placed a steadying hand on hers. "Take your time," he said gently. Amara drew in a shaky breath. "The rain came down so hard and fast. I got taken in the water, and I thought I was going to drown. But then I saw the tree branch. I grabbed it and held on. I was there hours before you came." She wiped the tears from her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I haven't heard from my dad since before he left. I don't know what has happened to him. I'm scared something bad has happened to him." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Arnold tightened his grip on her hand, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "I'll be looking for him," he said firmly. "I promise you, Amara, let's not give up." Her eyes met his, a flicker of hope breaking through her fear. She wiped her tear-stained cheeks against his hand. Thank you so much," she whispered, and lightly kissed it. "You're not alone in this," Arnold added, his voice steady. "We'll get through it together, and if your dad is alive, we will find him." Amara nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time that evening. They finished their meal in silence, the fire crackling softly in the background. Though the weight of the situation still lingered heavily over them, Arnold's words gave Amara a small, precious comfort, the promise that she wasn't facing this uncertain future on her own. The wind howled outside the cabin, a mournful sound that had become a constant backdrop to their nights. Amara lay on the sleeper sofa, her eyes wide open in the dim light of the dying fire. She had been unable to sleep, the silence between the gusts of wind too still, too heavy. Then she heard it, a low scratching sound. Her breath hitched. The noise came again, louder this time, accompanied by a faint thud against the cabin wall. She froze, her heart pounding as she strained to listen. Gathering her courage, Amara slipped off the sofa and padded down the short hallway to Arnold's room. She knocked softly at first, but when another scratching noise sent a shiver down her spine, she barged the door open and hurried to his bedside. "Arnold," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Arnold, wake up. I hear something outside." Arnold stirred, his instincts immediately on alert. He sat up, his weathered face illuminated by the faint light spilling in from the hallway. "What did you hear?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Scratching," Amara said, her voice trembling. "And thumping. It's something big." Arnold swung his legs over the side of the bed, pulling on his boots and grabbing the shotgun he kept leaned against the wall. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay here. I'll take care of it." But Amara shook her head. "I'm coming with you." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but stay close behind me." They moved toward the main room together, the firelight casting flickering shadows on the walls. The scratching came again, followed by a low, guttural growl that made Amara's blood run cold. Arnold peeked out through a crack in the wooden shutters. His face tightened. "It's a bear," he muttered. Amara's eyes widened in fear. "What do we do?" Arnold thought quickly. He knew firing the shotgun might scare it off, but he didn't want to waste more ammo unless it was absolutely necessary. Grabbing the broom from beside the door, he gestured for Amara to stay back. "Keep behind the table," he instructed. Arnold opened the cabin door just a crack, enough to step outside, but not enough to let the bear push its way in. The creature loomed in the darkness, its massive frame silhouetted against the faint moonlight. Its claws scraped against the wood of the cabin, leaving deep grooves in the logs. "Get out of here!" Arnold bellowed, his voice echoing across the stillness of the night. He waved the broom wildly and started rhythmically banging it against the porch railing. The bear froze, startled by the sudden noise. "Go on!" Arnold shouted again, taking a bold step forward. He jabbed the broom in the bear's direction, keeping his movements erratic and loud. The bear growled, stepping back reluctantly. Arnold banged the broom against the porch railings, the sharp sound enough to finally send the creature lumbering away into the woods. Arnold waited until the bear disappeared into the shadows before retreating into the cabin, bolting the door behind. Amara stood by the table, her facial expression concerned but her eyes filled with relief. "Is it gone?" she asked. "It's gone," Arnold confirmed, setting the broom aside and leaning against the doorframe. His shoulders sagged with the weight of the encounter, but he offered her a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing waking me up. Good instincts." Amara managed a small smile, though her hands still shook. "I thought it was going to break in." Not on my watch, Arnold said firmly. We'll be all right. He pulled her into a brief protective hug before steering her back toward the sleeper sofa. Get some rest. You'll be safe now. Amara nodded, her trust in him unshaken despite the terror of the encounter. As Arnold stoked the fire and settled into a chair near the door, he glanced at her once more. She had curled up on the sofa, her eyes fluttering shut in exhaustion. The room was quiet, save for the faint crackle of the fire from the main room and the occasional creak of the wooden cabin settling in the night. Arnold stirred from his sleep, opening his eyes to the sight of Amara standing by his bed, her small frame outlined in his t-shirt. "Amara?" he said, his voice groggy but alert. "What's wrong?" She twisted her hands together, her eyes narrowed and her lips trembling. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if the bear comes back?" Arnold sat up, his heart heavy with empathy. He knew how much the storm, the coyote, and now the bear had frayed her nerves, but her request gave him pause. "You want to sleep in here?" he asked gently. She nodded, her wide eyes pleading. "Please?" He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "All right," he said finally. "But stay on that side of the bed, okay?" Calmness flooded her face as she climbed into the bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Arnold shifted to give her space, lying back down and closing his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her voice barely audible. Arnold didn't respond, already drifting back into sleep. Hours later, something stirred him awake. He blinked into the darkness, disoriented at first. Then he felt the warmth of her skin pressed against his front side. Glancing down, he saw Amara nestled close to him, her head resting against his hairy chest. One of her long braids had fallen across his arm, and she clutched the edge of the blanket like it was a lifeline. Arnold's first instinct was to move her back to the other side, but the sight of her peaceful face stopped him. She looked so young and vulnerable, a stark reminder of everything she had been through. For a moment his heart ached, not just for her, but for all the lives that had been upended by the storm and the ones he couldn't save. He sighed quietly, settling back into the pillow. His arm stayed where it was, cradling her gently, as if to shield her from the world. "It's okay, kid," he murmured softly, though she couldn't hear him. "You can stay." On a Saturday afternoon, Amara wandered around the room, clutching the remote she'd found while cleaning up the cabin. "Arnold, you think your TV works?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and skepticism. Arnold, sitting at the dining table sorting through a stack of papers, looked up and adjusted his glasses. "Doubt it, kid. It hasn't worked the past 3 weeks. Why would it be any different now?" Still, Amara was undeterred. She pointed the remote at the TV set and pressed the power button. The screen flickered, static filling the room for a moment before the image of a news anchor appeared. "Arnold!" she shouted, her excitement palpable. "It's working! Come look!" Arnold abandoned his papers and joined her, his brows furrowed in disbelief as he took a seat on the couch beside her. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "That is a cable TV. Guess it has resumed picking up signals, even with the phones still down." The two of them sat together, their eyes glued to the screen. The anchor was discussing the aftermath of the hurricane, images of devastated areas and planned rescue efforts flashing across the broadcast. Then the camera shifted to a group of people huddled in a relief center, their faces lined with worry and exhaustion. "These are families searching for loved ones who were in Woodbury during the storm," the anchor said. Arnold leaned forward slightly, his hand resting on his chin, but Amara's reaction was immediate and electric. "Wait!" she exclaimed, pointing at the screen. That's my mom. That's her." The camera lingered on a black woman in her 40s, her hair covered in a scarf. Her eyes shimmered with light tears as she held up a photograph of a young girl. "If anyone's seen my daughter Amara," the woman pleaded, please let me know. She's all I have." Amara turned to Arnold, her face glowing with hope. "I can't believe it. I just saw my mom. I want to go home." Arnold smiled softly, placed an arm around her shoulders and gently rubbed her arm. "Of course you do. And you will. Don't worry. They are working on getting a military rescue team out here." Amara practically bounced in her seat. "I'm going to be so glad to go back home." Arnold nodded, his voice steady and comforting. "I know," he said, smiling. "Hey now, the governor is saying they'll have the guard units out here by next week." Amara muffled her mouth with her hand in astonishment. She felt extremely happy, sat down on Arnold's lap and hugged him. For the first time in days, the crushing weight of uncertainty seemed to lift. As the broadcast continued, the two of them watched and listened to others expressing concern for their loved ones. Arnold gently massaged Amara's arm. For Amara, this was a time of great joy and renewed hope. Later, Amara laid down on the sofa bed wrapped in a blanket. The firelight flickered on the cabin walls, and outside the wind howled, but inside, the world seemed to hold its breath. The quick-shop convenience store was bustling with the hum of idle chatter and the occasional beep of the register. Arnold stood in line, his weathered face calm, though his mind wandered. The past 4 years had been quieter, spent in the suburbs where life moved at a faster pace, yet something in the air today felt different, familiar. As he got in line, his gaze caught sight of a tall, slender young woman standing at the front of the line. Her wavy dark hair caught the light, and there was something about her posture, her presence, that tugged at a memory long tucked away. He watched as she paid the clerk, her voice soft but steady, then walked toward the pumps outside. Arnold paid for his box of matches, tucked it into his pocket, and stepped outside just as she finished fueling her Honda. She was about to open the car door when he found himself walking toward her, the name escaping his lips before he could think twice. "Amara?" The young woman turned sharply, her dark eyes widening as recognition dawned. "Arnold?" He nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "Yeah, it's me." Without hesitation, they embraced, the years melting away in the warmth of the hug. Memories of the storm, the cabin, and the bond forged in those harrowing weeks rushed back to both of them. When they pulled apart, they stood for a moment, simply taking each other in. "You look so different," Arnold said, his voice tinged with wonder. "So do you," Amara replied with a laugh. "But I'd know you anywhere. I've told my husband so many times about the man who saved my life." Arnold chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, I'm glad you made it through. You look like you're doing well." "I am," she said, her smile widening. "I'm married, my husband's a car salesman, and I work at the local cable company in customer care. It's not glamorous, but it's steady." "That's great news," Arnold said earnestly. "I'm so proud of you, Amara. If I were your father, I couldn't be prouder." She tilted her head, studying him. "What about you? What have you been up to?" "Not much," he admitted. "I retired and am living with Pat and her family now. Spend most of my time fixing up their home and trying my hand at gardening." "That sounds wonderful," Amara said. "You deserve that, after everything." They fell silent for a moment, the weight of their shared history unspoken but palpable. Finally, Amara spoke, her voice soft. "Like many, my dad was never found. Still, I'll never forget what you did for me, Arnold. You gave me hope when I didn't have any left. I'll always be grateful for that." He reached out and squeezed her shoulder gently. "You don't owe me anything, Amara. I'm just glad you're happy and doing well. That's all that matters." They embraced again, this time with the quiet understanding that their bond was something neither time nor distance could erase. As they pulled apart, Amara smiled. "I'm glad we ran into each other. It's good to see you." "Likewise," Arnold said, his voice warm. They said their goodbyes, each returning to their car. As Arnold drove to his daughter's home, he felt a sense of closure and contentment. His life and Amara's had taken separate paths, but they would always cherish the moments they shared, the unbreakable bond they had forged after the storm.